Welcome back, everybody. So we have finished our series on First Contact Summer. And so we talked all about June, the month of decloaking. I did go through locations that I think are hotspots for whether that be external first contact or just some type of deep transformation, right? And some of the states that are high on my list of contact and activity and some sort of just like evolutionary spark. I think there are certain states that are more primed for that. Talked about July and the month of actual first contact, right? With the future, with what we're moving into. And August, the month of the solar flash energy. And so I did mention that moving into the fall, we then move into this very deep integrative process. I'm going to do a video on that as we get closer to there, because I'm going to go in depth as to the retrogrades that we have in the fall and then leading into the winter and early 2027, because it is very interesting. We will not only have a Venus retrograde in Scorpio, but a Mercury retrograde in Scorpio at the same time. And I think that that's very interesting. And this is one of those years that's a little bit rare on top of every other rarity is that we're going to have a Venus retrograde and a Mars retrograde back to back. And those two only happen every couple of years, but it's not usually that we get them one right after the other. So as soon as we finish up a Venus retrograde in Scorpio, which it will move into Libra, then back into Scorpio, so it's an extended stay there. We'll also have a Mercury retrograde in Scorpio at the same time. And then we almost immediately move in to a Mars retrograde, which takes us to like the middle of 2027. So, I'll do a video later as we get closer to that time on that. But what I wanted to talk about today is the 2027 Incarnation cross change. You might have heard Hope and I talk about this on our show. We're probably going to continue to talk about it because in human design, right? And I'll go through a little bit of the backstory of human design. Human design was basically a system that was channeled by Ra, and he set out some very key transition dates for us. And one of those was 1987, which was the harmonic convergence, 2012, which was basically the second wave of like awakening, if you will, and then 2027 as the key milestone and kind of the final stretch of the awakening or ascension process, right? And so one of the things that is part of the human design cycles is what's called an incarnation cross. And so each of you have your own personal incarnation cross. These will be your 4 main gene keys. And the combination of those gene keys makes up a variety of crosses. So there's many incarnation crosses. I'm not exactly sure how many, but there's quite a lot. And it gives you kind of, similar to astrology, gives you kind of an overarching guide as to what the path is in your life and what the core purpose and mission is of this particular incarnation for you. Now, on a collective level, we also have incarnation cross cycles. And these cycles last for a little over 400 years. And Ra has written extensively about the fact that 2027, we would be changing incarnation crosses, okay? And after 400 and something years, which means that on top of everything fucking else that we have going on, astrologically, energetically, right? We are shifting. And so that global incarnation cross changes the way that everything functions. Right? It literally changes the trajectory of the collective and where we have to move into a new blueprint. So one of the most interesting parts here is that for the past 400 plus years, it's actually been since 1615. So in 1615, we entered the cross of planning, which I'll get to, and we are now wrapping that up. So we are in the last 6 months of this incarnation cross that has been active since 1615. So this is another reason, another layer, and honestly, a really big layer, as to why we're all feeling like everything is changing rapidly, right? And so I'll just read a little bit of an excerpt here. This is from thehumandesigncollective.com. And the author says, there is an important aspect of this view of evolution to consider: the global background frequency that our species is operating in at any given time in our history is known as the global cycles in human design, which are connected to the changing planetary frequencies related to the precession of equinoxes. The precession of equinoxes is the tilt or the wobble of the earth. And in astrology, this is what we call the ages. And in human design, they call it the global cycle. So this is related to basically the precession of equinoxes, which is where we get, and most commonly people are referring to, exiting the age of Pisces, the Kali Yuga, and entering the golden age and the age of Aquarius. Those are very much based on the precession of equinoxes. And so the global cycles that he's referring to is a mini cycle within that. Okay, so it's a 26,000 year cycle when we change ages. And within that 26,000 years, human design breaks this up into global cycles that are 400-ish years long. So the author says, for approximately the last 400 years, humanity has been in a background frequency called the cross of planning. This is the cosmic influence that allowed for the focused development of skills and patterns, resulting in the scientific, technological, and medical advancements of the last 400 years. The cross of planning also allowed for the flourishing of a wide range of tribal organizations and institutions in the forms of governments, religious organizations, and the latest form of tribalism, corporate entities. Some would like to solely credit human ingenuity and drive to these achievements, but from the point of view of human design, all of this has happened because the background frequency of the global cycle has supported it. And so this is a quote straight from Ra himself and what he said about the cross of planning. And he said, the glue of the cross of planning has held together our lives for the past 400 years, but there will soon be no inherent need, drive, or purpose fulfilled through coming together to protect this way of life. This means we will basically end up with a breakdown in the way in which society functions. We are not going to live in an age of innovation in the way that we know it. The age of innovation is now, and we are at an incredible place in time, leading up to 2027. So he says the year 2027 is a pivotal turning point in the global cycles. We will exit the cross of planning and enter the cross of the sleeping phoenix. Now, one of the biggest changes here is that the cross of planning, and we're going to get into understanding what we're exiting, and also the sleeping phoenix, which is what we're entering, and how that's going to change how we function, right? It's the signal, the frequency in which we're functioning under. And the cross of planning was a tribal cross, which means that all the things they're talking about, like we functioned, everything that we built and everything we set up was based on tribalism. So we gave the example of like government institutions and religious institutions, corporations, like everything was based on this idea of like, you know, a tribe or a group or a collective, and that this is how we're having to function. And the cross of the sleeping phoenix is an individual cross. So this means that everybody psychologically has to shift into, we need to exit this tribalistic group thinking, and it's going to be an individualized frequency, which means it's not everybody out for themselves in like a dog eat dog type of way, but it's an individualized journey now. It's no more about groups, collectives. It's about the self, right? And so he goes on to say that this shift represents a movement out of strategic, focused tribal communities towards individual empowerment. It also brings in the aforementioned themes of developing spirit awareness and new forms of intimacy and connection. Anyone paying attention can already see these changes emerging in our world, with the increasing lack of trust in faith in our institutions and leaders, new forms of relationships and sexuality, and so many people looking for personal connection to truth and spirit. Again, this is part of Ra's personal channelings. He said that 2027 represents another jump in evolution, and that basically children born after 2027 would be a different species. And I've been talking about that extensively. I've done many videos talking about how we are moving into a new race of humans, like the triple helix DNA, the light bodies, and that we are moving into being a blend of cosmic beings and human beings, and that this ultimately represents a new species. And so a little bit about the change, right? So this article is from jovianarchive.com. They're one of the best human design websites if you're interested in learning more about it. And so this author talks about the cross of planning that we're exiting. And so the reason I think this is important in conjunction with this first contact summer energy, and why I keep harping on connecting to the future, right? Rather than trying to connect up, like etherically, it's connecting to the future, because that is what we're trying to birth and move into. And I'm harping on that because we are exiting so many cycles that represent the old world, and we're moving into the new world. And we have to be able to anticipate what that means for us, how we need to change our way of being. Like, you know, we've done years and years of like ego death and healing and embodiment and, you know, all that stuff, which was essential for the journey. And now what we're talking about is, okay, after all that work is done, how are we actually going to move into this new world and this new paradigm? And we have to deeply understand that things are going to change. Like the way we've done things before is not going to work anymore. The industries that you see right now, many of them are not going to last. They're not going to move into the future. So the cross of planning says that it influenced humanity to work together in a way that we had never done before. So quickly, the 4 gene keys of the cross of planning, and just if you happen to have any of these gene keys like in your main profile, it might be a good idea to just explore making sure that we've moved into the gift level of those keys, right? Because every key has a shadow, a gift, and a Siddhic state. Now, the Siddhis are not necessarily going to dawn right away. Again, those are like the really super enlightened states of being, and we're just not there yet. But we do want to make sure we're moving out of the shadows here and into the gift, because I think what's happening is as we prepare to move incarnation crosses, which the official date of that is February 23rd, 2027. And so we have like 7.5 months or so. I think it's like 7.5 months. Right now is the loudest part of the death of that incarnation cross. And so we have to kind of do some reflection of like, have we moved out of the shadows of this cross, right? Because we want to master it as we move our way out and into a completely new cross. So if you have any of these gene keys as like core parts of your human design chart or your gene key profile, then it would be something good to look at. So the 4 gene keys of the cross of planning is gene key 40, gene key 37, gene key 16, and gene key 9. And within these 4 gene keys, gene key 40 and 37 actually create a channel, which means they're connected in their energy. And gene key 40 is located in the willpower center. So, and I'll get to brief descriptions of all of these keys, but the willpower center is an interesting one in human design. Most people have it undefined. It's very rare to have your willpower center defined. And so if you do, you're always trying to achieve things based on force, like pure willpower. You are basically forcing the boulder up the mountain. And that's gene key 40. It's located in the willpower center, and it actually connects directly to gene key 37, which is in the solar plexus. So you can see how those connect. It's a lot about wanting to force our desires out into the world, force things to happen just off our own strength and determination and willpower. The other two keys, 16 is located in the throat and 9 is located in the sacral. They are not connected though, but that did bring in a lot of energy of like that creativity, right? And also the speaking and the communicating and the expression. So he goes on to talk about a little bit about these channels here. And he talks about the channel between 37 and 40 that I mentioned. He said, this is where the tribal bargain is struck, bringing loyalty to support the community. So he calls this the channel of community, 40 to 37. So that's 40 from the human design charts down here in the willpower center connecting to the solar plexus. The channel of community merges the willpower to provide for the family or tribe with the emotional need to give affection in return for resources, to work together to fulfill the demands of the community. This channel is a global conditioning force that brings definition between these two centers. Now, interestingly, he also, in human design, they refer to the willpower center as the heart/ego center, which I find really bizarre because those are paradoxical. But we can probably intuit that most people are operating in the ego rather than the heart. And so that's the expression of it. He says, if you ponder it, our situation is very different from those of prior epochs, and we had no choice. It was simply time for a revolution that changed the ancient ways of rulership. So basically, the cross of rulership was active from the year 721 AD to like the 1202 AD. And that was the cross of rulership. And so after that, he said modern democracy was kind of born because nobody wanted to be under rulership, right, of these kings and queens and monarchies and things like that. So he says, it is the channel of community that establishes our fundamental codes with the way our civilizations have developed. It is the bond of community to protect itself, to have religions, to be able to have resources to defend itself. All of these things became the bedrock of modern civilization. The fact is that the channel between 47 and 30 brought the contractures of the agreement between those that govern and those that are governed. It is the 40 to 37 channel in its inherent bargain that created the ability for human beings to live in a vastly overpopulated environment and still manage to do so in some sense of peace. Cycles move through lines. So basically there are 6 lines to every key, 1 through 6. And so he basically says that when we change incarnation crosses, we actually move through all 6 lines of each of those keys throughout the 400 plus years. And so he goes on to say, everything that we take for granted, from governmental structure to the support mechanisms of our communities, are going to continue to disintegrate. Without the bargains being upheld and renewed, cities will not be able to sustain themselves in the way that they have in the past. When the last of those born before 2027 are gone, the world will be a very different place. And he often talks about how we are flowering into 9 chakrad beings post 2027. So basically what he's talking about is that we have been in a sense of bargaining, right? We have a certain inherent contract with these tribal systems that we have, which is like, government, for instance. Like, we are voting and we're electing you to represent us. And so the bargain is, we will put you in this position of power, but you are going to serve us, right? Like that is the bargain. It's the bargain that the government should take care of us, that they should provide certain resources to us, right? Same thing with religious institutions. We're giving you money, we're giving you our faith, our devotion, and in turn, you're supposed to provide something for us, right? So it's this whole like contractual thing. And he's saying that a lot of that is going to dissolve, and that's why cities in particular are going to fall first. Because when that contract is up, when the people no longer respect or trust the people that are governing them, they will remove their power. And when the people who are supposed to govern lose power, there is no more contract, right? And so I think this is going to be the fall of a lot of systems and structures that move us into self-governance, which is very much part of the new Incarnation cross, which is an individual cross, right? There's going to be less group mentality and much more individualism. I think but it's going to be dicey. And this is why with the North Node moving into Aquarius at the end of July and the South Node into Leo, we're going to have to create a very delicate balance because people are going to be very out for themselves, and a lot of them will fall into deep selfishness with it. I think we all do need to focus on ourselves and what is best for us, but we also have to acknowledge and make sure that if we are doing what is best for us, then ultimately we should be serving the whole naturally, right? Like if I'm doing what fulfills me, what brings me joy, what brings me my highest embodiment, and what, I enjoy in terms of like my service, my purpose, my mission. If I'm doing what's best for me in all those ways, then that naturally serves the whole. But if you're doing it in the ego selfish way and it only serves you and it doesn't serve the whole, that's where you're going to see people have a hard time as well. But it's going to be a little dicey for a bit. But this is where I feel the intensity is picking up because we're about to change into the cross of the sleeping phoenix. So the cross of the sleeping phoenix has 4 different gene keys. So again, if these are any of your gene keys, you might want to dive into those. Gene key 55, gene key 59, gene key 34, and gene key 20. Now, Uranus happens to be in gene key 20 right now, so just keep that in mind, and it's opposing gene key 34. So that and these two actually make a direct channel. Similar to the cross of planning where 40 and 37 made a direct channel, these two have it. And so this channel goes from the sacral to the throat. So this is actually a manifesting generator channel. So this means that when you are speaking things out loud, you are manifesting them. That's how the Mani-Gen channels work, right? It's the idea of communication, expression is the way that the sacral is manifesting. And this is the channel that is the most activated right now because of Uranus's presence there. Gene key 55 is a solar plexus channel. And then gene key 59 is also a sacral channel. So we have a lot of energy here with the sacral, solar, and throat. So they talk about that this, he said, remember the cross of planning is fundamentally tribal and collective. It is responsible for the support and success of developing global community based on bargains, details, and skills. While the sleeping phoenix, specifically with this channel, 34 to 20, is about integration, self-empowerment, preservation, and the core individuation process where we distinguish ourselves from everyone else. He said 3 of the gates here of the Phoenix Cross are profoundly individual and deeply mutative. He said in 2027, again, as I mentioned, throughout the 400 years, you are moving through each one of these 4 gene keys in different kind of cycles, if you will. And he says in 2027, the first gene key of this new cross that we will be moving through is gate 55, which is the gate of abundance and the gate of spirit. And so he specifically, and again, we're going to start at the 6th line, which for those who aren't familiar with human design, the 6 lines all carry different energy. So the 6th line is about mastery. So it's kind of interesting that we move from the 6th line to the 1st line, and the 1st line is all about establishing the self, and taking initiative, and very much like the one energy. So Ra said that the 6th line in gate 55, which is the first thing we're going to hit on February 23rd, 2027, he said the positive of this line is, he said, it will be acquisition obsession. So the obsession with acquiring material resources could feel alienating, but it is still indirectly beneficial to others. It is the possibility of finding spirit through materialism. Now, I think that's interesting because we're going to have Chiron officially enter Taurus next year. The conversations are all going to be around resources, abundance, prosperity, what we own, what we value, what matters to us. So I think it's an interesting take where he says everyone's going to be obsessed basically with acquiring resources, and that this could feel alienating, but is actually beneficial to others. So maybe it's the idea that, like, again, if we look at tribalism and collectivism in the previous cross, you can see that all the wealth was hoarded at the top. So there was a certain group, right? A certain tribalistic group that all held the wealth. Now, if we can maybe see more individuals rise to a place of pure wealth and abundance and prosperity, then maybe the idea is that it opens up abundance for everybody else, like less of a gatekeeping. But again, this could be dicey. Now he says the detriment of this line is where the material abundance exists, but no one gets to share its light. It is a possibility that materialism becomes obsessive with a mean spirit that will not share. So that's going to be interesting. But he said we are entering into an age of self-empowerment. This is really interesting, and it kind of like is so paradoxical, and even for myself to like understand, it's very paradoxical to everything that we have talked about and felt about the new earth and the new paradigm, and how it's all unity consciousness, and it's all about the giving and receiving and the sharing and the love and the connection. But the astrology and the human design, I think, of course, ideally, a new paradigm and new earth is all of those things. Everybody is in a divine state. Everybody is supporting each other. There's love, there's reciprocity, there's care. Like, that is the ideal state. But astrologically and human design wise, it doesn't support that off the bat. Like, getting there is actually going to feel very different than what we're imagining. So Ra goes on to say that the next age is not about looking after your neighbor, but after yourself. We are moving into a global theme of potentially enlightened selfishness. Our key is to use strategy and authority to unveil our unique human process, our own inner truth, which is not dependent on anything outside of ourselves. We are not here to be afraid of the changes coming or to struggle through them. We are here to have the courage to rise to the occasion in alignment with our true nature. We cannot expect anyone to take care of us. It is time to be empowered in our authority. We are here to watch the unraveling of our social fabric and discover our inner truth as we move to become more self-empowered. So this is the conundrum, right? Because, and again, this is going to have a lot to do with the South Node in Leo conjunct Jupiter in Leo. Like I've said before, that in of itself is a paradox because Jupiter's the expansion. She's the oracle. She's the guide. She's like, hey, lean into this, more of this. Like, this is where the magic is. This is where the growth is, right? And Leo notoriously is a little selfish. They're mainly concerned about themselves, their own happiness, their own creative expression, their own fulfillment, which we need that in life. You have to be able to focus on yourself, right? And then on the tail end, we have the North Node in Aquarius, which is more big picture. What's good for the collective? What's good for progress and innovation and evolution? But Pluto's there. So it is a very strange setup, the way that we have it, because when Jupiter's in Leo, conjunct the South Node is supposed to be what we're releasing, what we need to do less of. So how are we going to dive more into being self-focused and fulfilling our own golden timeline and fulfilling our own joy and our own creative expression, while at the same time doing less of it? And then if we're moving into North Node Aquarius, which is very much like, hey, it's about innovation, it's about community, it's about, reciprocity and collaboration and just more collectivism focused. But Pluto is sitting there, destroying the idea of community, destroying the idea of collectivism. I think it goes in line with this incarnation cross. It's a paradox. Like I said, I will talk more about the nodes and stuff. I think I have a good insight into them because I live with that natally. I have Jupiter in Leo conjunct my South Node in Leo. So it is a conundrum and I live within it every day. So I think I could have good insight as like, how are we going to balance this, right? So let's just talk briefly about what we need to let go of the cross of planning. We'll start with Gene Key 40. So again, if you have this one, I'm just going to do these really briefly, but I do recommend you guys getting the Gene Key book by Richard Rudd. It's really great material. So Gene Key 40, this is the one located in the G Center, the Willpower Center. The shadow is exhaustion. The gift is resolve, and the Siddhi is divine will. So basically he says that, will is the use of human willpower. The 40th shadow is deeply connected to the conversion of food and liquid into energy through the stomach. Exhaustion is due to ineffective energy conversion of food and liquid into chi, resulting in the body having to draw upon its precious reserves to form chi, basically. And so he says that Gene Key 40 is responsible for transforming our civilization and society through alliances, solid boundaries, and mutually beneficial exchanges between individuals, communities, and even nations. Willpower used in the wrong direction becomes force. Even though it may succeed in its endeavor, the result to the body will be catastrophic and irreversible. So again, I think this is what we're hitting. As we're changing out the crosses, Chiron's in Taurus, squaring Pluto in Aquarius, it is bringing up the reality that we are not meant to work at this level. And the cross of planning, unfortunately, I think led to a lot of this like age of burnout. This obsession with productivity, this obsession with work harder, do more, this like level that we're supposed to be operating at all the time. And again, this comes from the shadow of willpower, trying to force everything to happen all of the time. And he basically says the results on the body are catastrophic. And that is what a lot of people are going to be dealing with Chiron and Taurus, unfortunately, is that people's bodies will break down, especially if they haven't been doing healing work, focusing on their nervous system regulation, emotional regulation, taking care of themselves. Again, a lot of it's energy, releasing density. That's going to become a thing. So he says that this has led to the slave driver dynamic and addiction to work. He said some people will isolate themselves from others, becoming lost in their own ambitions and their addiction to work. The steady drain on their core vitality will lower their frequency. He says, despite this, many people often maintain their direction through the sheer force of will, but at the very cost of their own humanity. The 40th shadow is responsible for the feeling of loneliness or isolation, and it is what happens when you push against the flow or you give in to someone else's flow. He also said that people can become isolated from others through their refusal of receiving support or by constantly biting the hand that feeds them. And so again, I think the shadows of this cross are going to rear their heads in the next 7 months, because we have to see that it's dying out. But I do think we should do our best to really embody the gift of this cross as it's phasing out, because that's a foundation that can help us move into the next part. And so the gift is resolve, which he basically says it is becoming adept at giving to yourself. It is a deep physical relaxation. It is a balance between serving the world and serving your own enjoyment. So again, the gifts of this previous cross are going to help us set the foundation for moving into the new cross. This is talking about you need to serve others as much as you serve yourself. We have to learn how to relax. We have to learn how to chill the fuck out, myself included. And the Siddhi is divine will, where he basically says it is a complete divine relaxation. We don't push or force anything. Everything is a divine flow. Okay, so that's Gene Key 40, and that connects to 37, which they create that channel, the channel of community. And so 37 here, the shadow is weakness, the gift is equality, and the Siddhi is tenderness. And basically he says in the shadow here that he said weakness is nothing but a projection of the male psyche onto the female psyche. In the West, women have been viewed as the weaker sex. However, what appears to humans as weak is actually something that we don't fully understand. He said, much about this gene key concerns the nature of a force, meaning the feminine, that is perceived as weak, but inevitably shows to be the opposite. The shadow represents the inequality between yin and yang on the planet. Again, I think that's another reason why matriarchy's on the rise again. And there's a lot of conversations about returning to the mother, returning to the feminine energy, because if we look at this cross of planning, it seems to me we've been in the complete shadow of it the entire time. Like, did it lead to some sort of progress, evolutionarily speaking? Maybe. Like, as Richard Rudd said, it kind of came out of desperation because of what happened before that, and the rulerships and the kind of like, colonization and domination and things like that. We had to move into something new. So this was more like, okay, everyone's going to work together and we're all going to have these, social contracts with each other. I help you, you help me. But I think the shadows of this have dominated, unfortunately. And so he said that this shadow is undergoing a major mutation throughout humanity. He said, in the West, the traditional family unit is experiencing a demise. The repressed feminine of humanity is rising to the surface, and this is disrupting the gender roles and all that stuff. And he says the true definition of weakness is when the feminine energy serves the masculine energy. Wherever you see the submission of the female to the male, you are seeing the shadow. And so he says the way this channel works with 40 and 37, he says our societies are currently structured where women feel impotent, financially dependent on men, and having the role of being, the raiser of children or the housekeeper or whatever. He says the pole shift that is upon us, we will see the reversal of this tendency so that the masculine energy serves the feminine energy. And so I think that's interesting. He calls this gene key the real pole shift. And that makes me think of the August solar flash theme that I did the video on, where I talked about the path of totality for that total solar eclipse in Leo and Project Anchor, where there was supposedly they were studying whether we were going to lose gravity for 7 seconds on August 12th, which happens to be the total solar eclipse. And it happens to be passing over the North Pole, which could very much disrupt our magnetosphere. It could mess up our electromagnetic fields. Is that going to be part of a pole shift? I don't know, but it's interesting that he calls this gene key the real pole shift, which he basically says is returning to the natural state. Instead of this imbalance of yin and yang, we return to the proper balance. And so he said, what we fear most in this shadow is lack of support, because our frequency does not allow us to feel a part of the whole or supported by the whole. We only give with the assurance that we will receive something back, and that this is rooted in fear. And the gift here is equality, where he says equality is a living ideal that lifts people out of being a victim or a winner. All of humanity is one family. When the balance within the human psyche is corrected, there will be no need of external religion. Again, patriarchal religions are the newest thing on the block. Okay, they've only been around for less than 2,000 years. Goddess religions and the religions of the earth have been here long before that. And so I think he's saying that that was, that's going to be a flip as well. When we restore our balance with the feminine energy, there is no need for these Abrahamic religions. There is no need for this energy of worship and organized religions, because that is not a natural thing. So that's interesting, because we're also seeing lots of conversations come up about that. Lots of religious rhetoric, lots of religious conflicts coming up. So he says that there will be families that make humans all equal, and we will find a new version of family. He said the new family will become a vessel for collective ascension. The more that you give, he said, this is the greatest economic secret. And maybe this has to do with Chiron and Taurus, right? It is going to transform the economy. I talked about the new human economy. That's my belief. That's what I feel that we'll move into. And he kind of talks about that. He said, the great economic secret is that the more you give, the more you receive. But you must learn to give to yourself first. Again, this is teaching us a lot as we move into the new cross, which is individual. And so finally, he says that the gift of friendship is part of this 37th gift, which holds humanity together, and true friendliness will come back with new social frameworks. And the Siddhi here is tenderness. And he basically says tenderness is like this archetypal motherly essence that will return to humanity. Now, gene key 16, that is the third one that we are moving out of. And the shadow of 16, I know this one well, I have it, is indifference. And he basically says, as long as you are indifferent, you will never be different. This concerns the fear of leaving your comfort zone and the diffusion of responsibility. So I would call it apathy. I think apathy is a big thing that we're moving out of. He said all human beings on the planet, if they were doing what they love, we would have a strong field. He said you have to make the courageous move into your own fears and overcome the lethargy that prevents you from making something beautiful out of your life. This shadow makes you feel like you don't have enough time because you're becoming a victim of the mind. He said this shadow is a pipe dream. It is the delusion that your dreams will one day manifest without you ever actually having to initiate them. When we lack enthusiasm and we are indifferent or apathetic, he says that we basically lose all of our energy and we have inertia. We're just frozen. We're not really doing anything, right? He says you actually have to begin the work. You actually have to start. And he said this can cause people to be addicted to information and techniques and logic and science. And again, we're not really creating our dreams. We're just addicted to the mental, right? And so the gift here is versatility, where he basically says that versatility is not a skill, it is a frequency. This is when you use your talents, and he says that this can spread across any industry, any role, any job, but we are just talented, versatile, flexible, multidimensional beings, and kind of using our gifts and our genius to its fullest extent, right? So, and he also talks about how this leads to self-sustainable living. So we're managing our energy well, we're sustaining our energy, and the Siddhi is mastery, where we are just masters and we can do anything. We can do anything because we're willing to put in the work and effort. We have enthusiasm. We're excited, right? And so that is also something I think to really grasp right now. And the final one is Gene Key 9. And the shadow of Gene Key 9 is inertia. The gift is determination, and the Siddhi is invincibility. The 9th shadow is about where you place your focus through your daily activities. And so he says, you do not know where you're going, but it doesn't matter. As long as you are taking small steps towards your overall dream, then every day is an adventure. The inertia of this shadow is the victim mind, which goes around in patterns of blaming or worrying. He said this is a huge drain to the physical body, and it closes you down from the higher frequencies. You must have an overarching purpose or vision or dream. He said if you don't have something like an overarching vision, you're just kind of mindlessly doing things every day, but it's not tied to anything. It's not tied to a mission or a purpose or a vision. You're just basically going through the motions in a loop, and it's not leading anywhere. And so he said the gift here is determination, which is a very small, very small act, which is the power of repetition. Every single step you take, which means no matter how small the act is, leads in the direction of your core vision. The more determined you are, the less energy you actually have to use. And this is what is called momentum. And he says that this is what true magnetism means. It is many small acts that all have the same intention because they're leading to a bigger vision. And that is what magnetism is, and that everything will be drawn to you. And again, we won't fall into the shadow of 40, which is exhaustion and trying to force our will. And I think all of these are saying the same thing. It's like when we're exhausted and drained and nothing has a purpose, nothing has meaning, there's no vision. We're just in a closed loop. And that's what we've been in. We've just been in a closed loop instead of a spiral, basically. And so, you know, we have finite energy, we have finite capabilities, we have finite expansion. And he said, you basically, your true course in life will just become clear and you will follow it. And now let's just briefly go through, I'll do probably as we, in 2027, you know, we'll talk more in depth about the gene keys of this cross, but 55 is quite a hefty one for those who have this book. It's quite big, and he has a few gene keys in the book where he goes really in depth with information, and 55 is one of those. The shadow is victimization, and then this is the only gene key where the gift and the Siddhi are the exact same, which is freedom. And so he basically says that we have to exit the shadow of victimization. And there is a universal law known as what goes around comes around. And he says in the shadow, we basically don't believe that. We don't see people getting their karma. We don't see people receiving what they've actually put out. But he says that it's often deeply energetic. It appears that many who succeed in life do so with the detriment to others around them. Likewise, the most innocent and open-hearted people can be filled with terrible trials that have no explanation. Thus, it can seem on the surface that this energy isn't true, right? What you reap, you sow. But he said, because of this tendency to only see the surface of things, the mass consciousness misses the deepest secret of life. On an energetic level, you do always reap what you sow. It just may take longer for it to become apparent in the material realm. He said to get out of the shadow here of the victimization, he said it all depends on one thing, which is your attitude. He said your attitude will have a complete change as to how you experience life. And basically that it is a frequency, and the frequency of freedom, non-attachment, all that jazz, that is what changes our experience. And so he goes into so many things here about like the different races humanity has been through, the different cycles. He talks about how every industry is going to change on Earth. So again, I'll go through that probably more in depth as we get closer to 2027. But that is a really fascinating gene key. And the next one is 59, also known as the dragon genome. And the shadow here is dishonesty. The gift is intimacy, and the Siddhi is transparency. Now, fun fact, right now, the south node is sitting at 1 degree Virgo. The north node is sitting at 1 degree Pisces. Guess what gene keys those nodes are in? 55 and 59. Okay, so just as an FYI, these are getting activated, and because Uranus is in 20, activating the 20 to 34 channel, basically this incarnation cross is very kind of active right now and already coming in. So in terms of dishonesty, he basically says that this is a deep distrust of others and a core fear of relationships. So this leads to our lack of transparency, where basically he says when we are in fear of others, we start lying. We are dishonest with our words. We aren't vulnerable. We are dishonest with ourselves because we're afraid of being judged or perceived, or we're afraid of somebody hurting us. And this leads to everyone living in dishonesty, right? And so he goes on to say that the real gift here is intimacy. And he says the female, and this is female energy, right? And he says intimacy is actually the ego dissolving. It destroys any interference patterns that appear to separate people. The power of intimacy is the power of two human auras authentically interacting. And that is what we're moving into. The Siddhi is full transparency, where he basically says there is no separation between the internal and the external. And again, month of decloaking, June, this is what I talked about. The internal starts becoming external, right? Because that's how we face ourselves. That is how we face what is truly going on inside, is when it becomes external, right? So this is an era where people can't lie anymore. They can't hide things anymore. They can't suppress things anymore. Everyone's going to be an open book. It's all going to be laid on the table. And I think that's going to be very deeply uncomfortable for everybody. But that is true healing. That is true intimacy, right? That is true freedom. And I think on the world stage, it's going to get weird. There's going to be a lot more, I think, that gets revealed, especially with this particular gene key of transparency, right? Okay, gene key 34. All right, gene key 34. The shadow is force. The gift is strength. The Siddhi is majesty. So again, the shadow of force, we're leaving that behind with the cross of planning, right? 40, which was exhaustion and self-will and trying to push everything along, right? And then we had 16, which was apathy and indifference. Gene key 9, inertia, right? It's like we're just going and going, but we're going in a loop. We're not really going anywhere, but we're sure pushing it. And so the shadow of force here, he calls this the bane of trying. And he said, despite our intelligence, this shadow that lies within us urges to use force to make things happen in life, which is highly destructive. He said, at low frequencies, all human beings are destructive to the collective. This creates ferocious competition, which is a threat to collective survival. He said, in modern terms, this shadow can be understood as the notion of trying. Trying implies forcing something to go a certain way when it won't go there easily on its own. Every time someone is caught in a space of trying to make something happen, they are under the shadow. He said, some people seem unable to stop moving in the direction in which they have set out. Any attempt at help or guidance from the outside falls on deaf ears. He said, basically, we want to enter flow. And he calls flow doing the right activity at the right time. That's flow. So you can see where we're exiting this cross of planning, where everything was strategic and hard work, and it's about productivity, and it's about you do this for me and I'll do this for you, and we're all just like, it feels tight. It feels very constricting, right? It feels exhausting. Everything about those gene keys just feels exhausting, right? And then this gene key is all about flow, and it's about trust. It's about, with the attitude thing, about positive thinking, right? And how, as they say, like, life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you respond to it. That's your attitude, right? And being honest and authentic and transparent. It's like, this is a very different era for us. Like, and I think it's going to take us a moment to transition here. But he said that this moves us into the gift of strength, which is doing the correct activity at the correct time. The result is a creative manifestation of an aligned life. Very different than the planning energy. It is the ability to act in harmony with natural forces. He said this is what gives birth to heroes and heroines. Often heroes feel uncomfortable about being praised because it seems to them that the whole thing was out of their hands, right? So it's kind of like when we're using our magic, he said this has everything to do with frequency in the DNA. He said if you raise your frequency of your DNA, your life changes, your destiny changes. And the Siddhi is majesty, where he basically says that we remember that we're God too. That we don't have to try so hard and force everything and control everything. Like, just work with the natural forces of life. We go where the energy's going. We follow intuitively what we feel. It has such a greater impact than trying to do, force, right? And again, I think this will be part of us returning to working with, like it says, the natural forces of the earth, the natural forces of the universe. That's why getting in tune with human design, astrology, your intuition, getting in tune with the earth and her cycles and her rhythms, that is how we're supposed to live. Not like always like going against the grain, right? Like for no reason. So that's just a great one. I love 34. And the final one is 20. I also have this one, so this will be interesting. And gene key 20, again, this is where Uranus is at the moment. The shadow is superficiality, the gift is self-assurance, and the Siddhi is presence. The role of this shadow is to keep human beings on the fringe of life without really plunging into it. And he compares it to being an ant, where ants are just running around, busy all the time, and all they're doing is really like trying to survive, right? And he said that a lot of this happens because of our thinking, that we are so in the mind that we've become this age of intellectualism. Everything is, again, a lot of the masculine polarity really pushed for that. It all has to be logical and scientific and make sense. And it's all about thinking and strategy and planning. And they've lost total connection with the natural way of being present, of feeling, of intuiting. And that's the pole shift. That's coming back to the feminine pole, because we've known that all along. We're like, this, whatever this setup is, it goes against nature in all ways. It goes against nature. It goes against the cosmos. We are just fucking ass backwards. And, we all know it. But, there's the select few who don't know it, who think that this is like progress, or this is like, we're just so, we're so advanced, so evolutionized. And he says the evolutionary phase that is now coming is an end to the superficial age, where mankind was separated from nature. Again, Chiron and Taurus, it is going to be the huge wake-up call of how disconnected we are from nature. Remember, we are nature. We are the cosmic human. We are not only made of the material of the earth, but the material of the stars. To me, those are one and the same. Earth is a micro expression of the cosmos. So nature to me is both of those things. Nature is Mother Earth, nature is Mother Universe, and we are part of it. And that disconnection, again, I talked all about that in my last video of the post-Plutonic future, and John Michael Greer talking all about how this age of Pluto has been everything that goes against nature and the cosmos. And that was hell. Basically, that was the expression of hell. And now we are ascending out of that. And it's happening exactly as this incarnation cross is happening. It's happening exactly with these astrological transits, Barbolt's basket. It's all at the same time. So nothing is a coincidence. This is the moment. This is the moment. He said, the mind prevents you from feeling one with life. When this translates into action, it is blind activity for the sake of activity, which becomes disruptive. What we want to move into, he says, when the mind has been overridden by our future awareness, connect to the future, connect to your future self. I'm telling you, our future awareness, our consciousness can begin to manifest activity that no longer meets resistance. And this is referred to as right action. Mom taught us all about right action and ingrained it into us. I deeply understand it. Right action is doing the right thing at the right time. And the only way that that can happen is when you are present, you're not thinking, you're not planning. You're not overanalyzing. You're not doing what you should be doing. You're not doing what you think should be done. You are doing what feels right, what is a natural flow in that moment, what naturally aligns, what meets no resistance. That is right action. And again, this is going to completely transform our entire society, civilization, ways of being, industries. The 9-to-5 will die. Because the 9-to-5 does not take into account right action or flow or health and wellness. It's just robotic. It's robotic and it's not natural. I don't know what will replace it, but I know that it will change. And the gift here is self-assurance. And he also calls this divine relaxation. Again, ties back to the gift of 40. Which they'll merge together. If we can anchor the gifts of the cross of planning, they are setting us up divinely to more seamlessly move into this incarnation cross. So divine relaxation seems to be another key theme here. As you begin to accept that life has its own plans and flow, you will stop interfering with the process on a mental level. Self-assurance marks the end of the human tendency to worry about life. It prepares you for a higher mutation where you escape being a victim of the mind. Again, shadow of 55, victim consciousness, right? You no longer have to try to control life. It's the philosophy of allowing everything to come to you rather than going out and chasing life down. And the Siddhi here is simply pure presence. So that's just a little introduction here, because I can feel the overlap of the crosses coming in. Again, we'll dive more deeply into this as we get into 2027. But just some things to contemplate and think about. And again, as we get down to the fall, I will definitely talk about those deeply, such a sacred time, deeply integrative, deeply healing with the Venus and Mercury retrograde in Scorpio. So we'll get to that. Love you guys. Happy full moon in Capricorn this weekend, and I'll see you in July.